When I first played Samurai Warriors 4 back in 2014, I was gratified and heartbroken at the same time. While the game was relatively fun and remained faithful to the series, I personally felt it hasn't evolved much with the times, especially when compared to its Dynasty Warriors counterpart, which has seen many more significant improvements over the years. The combat in the 4th Samurai Warriors felt a little dated with a certain lack of depth, and probably the worst offender of them all is that returning characters still continue to use the same moves way back from 04 when the series began. Come on, I'm tired of Yukimura jabbing his spear 1,000 times, followed by a swing. Then imagine my bafflement as Omega Force suddenly introduces Samurai Warriors 4 2, and not the extreme legends everyone was anticipating. Now there are a plethora of causes coming up as to why Omega Force didn't continue to use the Extreme Legends name, even really silly ones like Capcom suing them for reasons I don't really remember. But really the important part of it all is, what does the 2 really mean? Well, Samurai Warriors 4 2 is not an expansion at all, but rather a remake of the same game, or another side of the game, as the producer quotes. So basically the developers of Samurai Warriors 4 felt the game wasn't good enough, so I guess they had to, make it again? Omega Force even claimed 2 as the, quote, perfect version of Samurai Warriors 4. Pretty bold words, but how true is that? I guess we'll find out. So the first thing that hits you right off the bat is the main menu. While it certainly looks a lot prettier, there's only one important new option here, and that is Castle Mode, a series of challenges including Survival Mode that is kind of like a big throwback to the first Samurai Warriors. Remember that game? But let's detail how the predominant story mode works first. The biggest difference between the original and 2 story mode is that 2 follows primarily the perspective of one character instead of a group, kingdom, or clan. Meanwhile, the stories themselves aren't continuations, but just the same stories being retold through specific character narratives. The pro to this is that it gives story mode a much more personal feel, and the protagonist's identity is able to be better developed. On the downside, one of my biggest complaints about this is that you're no longer able to swap out the main character that follows through the entire length of the story, only your tagging bed buddy. As if Omega Force thought that the storytelling would be in vain if you're allowed to main anyone else on your side, right? Also, there isn't much of an overhaul or improvement in the storytelling either. You still have the awkward robotic looking cutscenes that resembles more of a puppet show, and even the ending cutscenes, which should be the most dramatic and emotional, leaves a lot to be desired. And then there's Castle Mode, which entirely replaces the more intricate RPG-style Chronicle mode of the past. Castle Mode itself isn't anything radical or new. It is essentially a fusion of survival and challenge mode, which was found in abundance in recent Exile expansions. Additionally, the premise of each challenge aren't exactly groundbreaking, but still, some are at least unique and decently fun. Chamber of Trials has you defeating as many enemies as possible within a time limit. Chamber of Riches has your character going from rags to riches, attempting to loot gold from as many enemies as possible. Chamber of Agility has you racing for record time as you avoid and stop obstacles in the way. Chamber of Death is, well, pretty much Chamber of Trials with the difficulty increased by a bunch. You'll also find yourself dying very quickly here as enemies can do a ton of damage to you. Fun! Survival Mode has your character navigating claustrophobic castle rooms to complete randomized objectives with enemies becoming stronger as you reach higher levels. You can freely exit the castle by using the escape point or the escape option available every 10th level. Having the entire mode taking place in a castle makes you get bored of your surroundings relatively quick, even if the challenge increases. Overall, Castle Mode is fun in sparse moments, but it isn't going to sell you the game. It pales in comparison to the more open-ended, longer-lasting Chronicle mode, which is unfortunately removed from the game. It kinda begs the question of simply, why? As ridiculous and out of place as his costume looks, Naamase-E controls even more ridiculous with his giant pointed spear, which causes him to fly all around the place like a drunken madman. But this is a good thing. This is a wonderful thing, as I honestly never had so much crazy fun playing a character in a Warriors game. I even dare to say that this guy alone is worth it to buy and play the game. Only kidding. Even if all you do is mash buttons non-stop, you still love playing as this guy. Unfortunately, this also leads to a sad part about his inclusion. He is the only single new character in the game. Seriously. Considering that past games added at least 2 to 3 new characters, having only one new character just gives me bad vibes about the developer being kind of lazy. At least they put a lot of effort into him, so I'll give them kudos for that. On to the gameplay changes. There are quite a few tweaks here and there that helps make you feel that you're not playing the exact same game as before, even though it is kind of like the exact same game as before. Hyper attacks are definitely one of the biggest changes, as they have been nerfed in terms of how destructive they are, but regardless still allow you to plow through the battlefield with little effort on easier difficulties. Certain troops are now more resilient to hyper attacks, causing your attacks to not only do little damage to them, but greatly hinder your movement and attack speed if you attack them with it. Additionally, if you defeat a captain around the troops, surrounding troops will fall on their bums and you can demolish them like ants, even with hyper attacks. It's just kind of disappointing that this strengthening of troops is applied only to sections of enemies only, so this isn't going to exactly eliminate the infamous triangle spamming like many players were complaining about. Another big change is how characters now grow skills and earn items to use in battle. Gone is also the proficiency system, and instead a giant grid replaces nearly everything. No, this isn't another conquest mode of Dynasty Warriors 7, but players are now required to use this grid to purchase and unlock skills and items for their specific character. The majority of weapon attributes are additionally pushed over to this grid. Now that might sound dandy and all, but a side effect is that weapon attributes are now lowered to a max level of 3 instead of 5. This grid also eliminates gems entirely, as you now have to collect certain colored books instead to use them in this wonderfully bizarre, overwhelming grid. The weapon upgrade system has also been improved, and there is now actually weapon fusion. Well, sort of. You can fuse 2 or more weapons together and improve their attack power and levels, but unfortunately you can't freely customize attributes. The first weapon will always retain the same attributes, regardless of the other weapons. This was one of the features I hoped the most they would make right, but unfortunately it seemed to have fallen a little short. The enemy AI has thankfully been given some positive treatment, as the AI in the original were borderline elementary. Typical enemy fodder are still dumb as rocks as you expected, but the AI of unique officers have been improved immensely. Unique officers all now have the ability to use their Musous, thank God, and can even tech out of juggles very quickly. Although this auto-teching can be considered a sin to players who liked juggling and doing combos. But considering how bad the original game was at allowing complex combos, this isn't anything too bad. Samurai Warriors 4 2 is not an expansion or a new game, but a remake that generally improves quite a few gameplay elements. But there's also some downfalls, such as the elimination of Chronicle mode and some rather odd design choices. Definitely not the perfect version of the game the developers were hoping for, but it is a notable step up from the previous nevertheless. I guess the biggest question you have to ask yourself if you're deciding to get this game is, did you thoroughly enjoy the original Samurai Warriors 4? And if yes, would you essentially like more of the same? If you answered yes to both, then this game would be right up your alley. And that is why I'm giving this game a cautiously recommended rating.